They told me it was just a routine fire mitigation job, clearing some brush to keep the neighborhood safe from wildfires. But 10 minutes later, my $70,000 prize bull was bleeding out on the ground, a bullet through his neck. The workers responsible claimed it was self-defense. The woman who ordered it smiled about it. Karen Delaney, the HOA president, didn't know who I was, or that she had just made the worst mistake of her life. It started on a Wednesday, the sun high over the hills and the smell of cedar thick in the air. I was out in the north field checking irrigation when I heard engines rumbling, engines that didn't belong there. Diesel engines, the sound of tires grinding against gravel, a noise that didn't belong in my quiet little corner of the world. I dropped the wrench, jogged up the slope, my boots kicking up dust, heart picking up speed. No fear yet, just a nagging instinct, a feeling that something was wrong. By the time I reached the top, it all became clear. A bobcat skid loader tearing through brush. Two guys with weed whackers slicing away at the fence line. And one guy, some contractor type, clipboard in hand, barking orders like he owned the place. The metal gate had been knocked off its hinges. A cheap access sign, zip-tied to the barbed wire, flapped in the wind, looking more like a last-minute excuse than anything official. This wasn't HOA land. My property was private, fenced off, clearly marked, and yet they were treating it like it was theirs. I shouted, loud, the kind of rancher shout that echoes off the hills, grabs people's attention. Everything froze. The clipboard guy swaggered up, chewing gum like he was chewing time, holding up his paper like it was a warrant. Told me they were contracted by the HOA to conduct mandatory vegetation clearing for fire safety. I told him he was trespassing. He laughed, pointed to his badge. Well, not exactly a badge, but some neighborhood security patch slapped on a cheap shirt. He handed me the paper. There it was, a directive from Karen Delaney herself. No call, no warning, no legal basis. Before I could even respond, I heard it. The sharp, cracking sound that split the air in two. A gunshot. For a second, everything went still. A sick, stretched silence followed, thick with something wrong. I ran toward the sound. Past the bobcat, I saw them. Two workers frozen in place. One of them still holding a smoking rifle. And there, lying in the dirt, was Brutus, my bull. The bull that was more than just an animal to me. He was worth more than some people's houses. He was legacy. He was family. I dropped to my knees, my heart pounding. I couldn't process it. Brutus wasn't just any bull. He was a champion, twice over, a genetic masterpiece. Bred from the best, calm and gentle, a prized possession. But now he was dead. His body still twitching, eyes wide open, nostrils flaring, as blood poured from the gaping wound in his neck. The worker who fired the shot mumbled something about self-defense. He said Brutus charged. But I knew better. The gate to his pen had been opened. He had wandered out, confused by the noise, moving slow, curious like he always did. And that man shot him anyway. I called the sheriff, but while I waited, I filmed everything. The broken gate, the dead bull, the access sign, the workers trying to act busy, pretending they hadn't just ruined a life. When the deputy showed up, the workers pulled out the same paper with Karen's signature. He frowned, took some notes, but said there would need to be an investigation. The workers weren't arrested, not detained. One of them even offered me a trash bag for the carcass. I didn't answer. I just stood there, fists clenched, watching them drive away. The next morning, I showed up at the HOA meeting. I wasn't technically a resident, but that wasn't going to stop me. Karen Delaney was at the front, pearls around her neck, that smug smile stretched across her face like she was chairing a charity gala. The moment she saw me, the smile dipped, but only for a second. I held up a photo of Brutus sprawled in the dirt, lifeless, and laid it on the table in front of her. The room went silent. She picked up the photo, glanced at it, then shrugged. Unfortunate collateral, she said, as if a champion bull's life didn't mean a thing. It's an overreaction. My team was just doing what was necessary to protect the neighborhood. You should be grateful. Then she leaned forward, condescending as hell, and asked, why was a dangerous animal allowed to roam free anyway? I didn't answer her. I just walked to the back of the room, letting her spin her narrative for the rest of the board. She talked about wildfire prevention, how neighbors had a responsibility to cooperate for the greater good, how they were doing a favor by cleaning up the land. She barely even flinched. But me? I was cataloging every word, every smug glance, every half-truth. What Karen didn't know, what none of them knew, was that just a week earlier, I had been appointed to the county's Agricultural Oversight Board. I wasn't just some guy with a dead bull anymore. I was the guy who got to approve or deny HOA expansion permits, conduct livestock welfare reviews, and audit the very documents Karen was waving around like a hall pass. And this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Brutus was gone, and I was pissed, but I wasn't looking for revenge. I wanted the truth. I wanted accountability. And I wasn't going to let Karen Delaney just bulldoze her way out of this. No, she had made a mistake. A big one. And she didn't realize yet that I was a hell of a lot more than just a rancher. I was now a part of the system that would bring her down. I wasn't about to make a scene in front of that HOA board. I knew better than to act on impulse. I've spent my life dealing with cattle, but I've also spent a lot of time wrangling bureaucrats, too. You don't win a fight by yelling. You win by being patient, being smart. And that's what I was going to do. The first thing I did was pull some strings. I called Judy from the county assessor's office. Judy and I go way back. Her husband and I served together on the wildfire recovery team after the big blaze in '03. She didn't ask any questions. I told her I needed every HOA boundary filing, land dispute complaint, and fire mitigation order with Karen's name on it from the past 2 years. By lunchtime, Judy had faxed me 28 pages of records. I scrolled through the documents and realized something important. Karen had crossed the line repeatedly, not just with me, but with other landowners too. She'd issued 5 unauthorized vegetation clearing directives in the past year, all outside her HOA jurisdiction. 2 of them were under review for misuse of authority. This wasn't a one-time thing. My land was just another casualty in her unchecked power trip. That wasn't the only thing I found. I dug through old records of HOA meetings and noticed something disturbing. Karen had been pushing for more power, trying to stretch the HOA's reach far beyond its legal limits. She had even filed documents that suggested she could override private property rights for fire safety. But when I checked her claims, the legal basis wasn't there. She'd been using an outdated clause meant only for abandoned lots to justify her actions on occupied properties like mine. So, I kept digging. I wasn't going to stop until I had everything I needed to make sure Karen didn't get away with this. As the days passed, the more I unearthed. One of my neighbors sent me drone footage of the workers opening Brutus's gate before the shot was fired. Another sent me photos of bulldozers tearing through a fence line on a neighboring property with no permission. More people reached out, telling me how they'd been affected by Karen's actions, mowing down their fences, destroying their property, and worse, without any notice. They all assumed it was legal. I started compiling statements from everyone, adding them to my ever-growing stack of evidence. Each photo, each timestamp, each angry text from a neighbor was another nail in the coffin for Karen. I knew I had to go deeper. The legal system, the county, everything had to be on my side. And for that, I needed to get some real dirt on Karen. I tracked down the former board member who had originally written the wildfire mitigation clause that Karen was now using as her excuse. A retired guy named Leo Sparks, living in Arizona now. He was still angry about how Karen had blocked his attempt to revise the clause years ago. After a couple awkward phone calls, Leo straight up told me the clause had never been meant for situations like mine. It was only intended to apply to abandoned lots that had grown too overgrown for safety, not to give the HOA free rein over private properties like mine. I kept all that information, along with the historical records, and I started preparing. It wasn't going to be just a case about a dead bull anymore. It was going to be about how Karen had overstepped her bounds, how she'd abused her position, and how she had harmed so many people in the process. I scheduled a meeting with the County Agricultural Oversight Committee, the very board I had just joined. This time, I wasn't going to hold back. I knew this was my chance to make sure Karen didn't walk away from this unscathed. When I walked into that meeting room, I didn't just bring a binder full of documents. I brought a case. I had photos, drone footage, emails, signed directives, and a death certificate from the vet confirming Brutus's cause of death. I had everything I needed to prove Karen's abuse of power. The chair of the committee, Dolores, a no-nonsense woman who'd been in the business long enough to know when something didn't smell right, took one look at the binder I handed her and raised an eyebrow. She flipped through the pages, her silence heavy in the room. She didn't say anything at first. She just flipped slowly through the documents, like she knew she was looking at something important. When she got to the page with Karen's signature on it, authorizing the vegetation clearing. Dolores let out a slow breath and muttered under her breath, "She's not going to like this." And that was all I needed to hear. The committee voted to open an emergency review of Karen's HOA authority, specifically focusing on her abuse of the fire mitigation clause. They even requested that she attend a county oversight hearing within 10 business days. I sat there quietly, not feeling satisfaction, not yet. But it was the first real step toward justice. The days leading up to the hearing felt like a storm gathering on the horizon. Every step I took, every piece of evidence I gathered, felt like I was stepping closer to a moment of reckoning. I wasn't the type to make a scene, wasn't the type to scream and shout. I was calm, methodical. And while Karen thought I'd just sulk over the loss of my bull, she had no idea that I was already knee-deep in something bigger. The morning of the hearing arrived like the calm before the storm. Cold, sharp, the kind of quiet you feel when everything's about to change. I dressed in my usual work clothes. No suit, no tie, just a button-down shirt. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I didn't need to. The truth spoke for itself. I brought 3 copies of every document I had compiled, every piece of evidence I had gathered, from drone footage to the signed directive to the death certificate. Everything was in my hands. I walked into the conference room, took a seat at the far left side. A few county board members nodded at me as they filed in, but no one said a word. Not yet. The tension in the room was thick, like the air just before a storm. The chairwoman, Dolores, sat at the head of the table, scanning the room, already knowing something big was about to go down. Then the door opened, and in walked Karen Delaney. She glided in like she was walking into a fundraiser, not a hearing. Her perfectly ironed suit, high heels, makeup flawless. She carried a sleek leather portfolio under her arm, like she was still under the illusion that her charm and polished words could get her out of this mess. She didn't look at me, but her pace faltered for half a second as she passed my row. She had no idea what she was walking into. When the gavel sounded, and the chair called the meeting to order, Karen smiled wide, leaning into the mic like she was about to give a campaign speech. She called the incident deeply regrettable, claimed the HOA acted in good faith, said they'd followed all available guidelines, and that the workers had been under the impression they were operating within a hazard mitigation zone, not private property. She didn't even mention Brutus by name. She just referred to him as the animal or the livestock. I watched her closely, every word, every gesture, every half-truth she threw out there. Her voice wavered for just a second when she was asked about the expired licenses of the workers, but she had no answer. She claimed she trusted the contracting agency, but Dolores pressed harder. Why was no official permission sought? Why weren't neighboring landowners notified? Why wasn't there an inspection report filed before operations began? And that's when I was called to speak. I didn't have a speech prepared. I didn't need one. I just opened my binder, pulled out the first page, one of the drone images of my property, untouched, fenced off, clearly separate from any HOA zone. I started walking them through everything. The broken gate, the workers operating without clearance, the clause Karen had twisted to justify her actions, and the outdated satellite image she'd used to try and prove her case. I even showed them the footage, the exact moment one of the workers reached for the gate latch, the exact second Brutus stepped out, calm and unaware, and the moment after when he was shot in cold blood. The room fell silent. Every person in that room watched that screen like they were seeing something sacred being defiled. And then I played the audio, the recording of Karen's voice from the HOA meeting, mocking my loss, laughing about how my cow hobby had gone wrong. It hit like a punch to the gut. But then, the final blow came from the county livestock officer who had quietly joined the back row. He stepped up to the mic, confirmed that Brutus had been part of a registered breeding program, insured through the county's agricultural partnership. Brutus wasn't just any bull. He was a genetic asset, legally protected because of his role in a regional development project. That changed everything. Karen hadn't just killed a bull. She had destroyed a protected asset, violated zoning laws, and committed agricultural sabotage. The room didn't just feel silent, it felt heavy. People were digesting what they'd just heard, processing the weight of it all. The committee chair turned to Karen, asking if she had anything to say in response. For the first time, Karen hesitated. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. She shuffled her papers nervously, but none of it could cover the hole she'd dug for herself. After a long pause, she finally muttered, It was an unfortunate oversight. That one phrase, cold, dismissive, clinical, landed like a shovel hitting the coffin. No one in the room bought it. Not anymore. The votes were counted within the hour. The committee declared Karen's authority suspended, pending a full investigation. A special hearing would be held to determine whether criminal charges would follow. Karen didn't make eye contact as she left the room. She didn't speak. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, echoing louder than anything she had said at the mic. I let out a slow breath. Not relief, not joy, just a kind of quiet acknowledgement. This wasn't just a win. This was the beginning. The fallout didn't stop there. Within 24 hours, local news stations picked up the story. Headlines flashed across the morning broadcast. HOA president suspended amid land overreach scandal. Champion bull killed in unauthorized operation. My name started showing up in articles. Reporters called me for interviews. But I didn't care about the headlines. I didn't want the spotlight. I just wanted Karen to face every consequence, not just in court, but in reputation. Lawsuits followed. The breeder filed one. I filed another. Neighbors joined in, submitting claims for damages, trespassing, and property destruction. The HOA members who had once stayed silent started calling for emergency elections. Karen's smiling face disappeared from newsletters. Her name was removed from the HOA website. She became a liability, a cautionary tale, and I didn't have to do a damn thing but let the truth work its way through the system. A week later, I got a call from Dolores, the committee chair. She told me the board had voted to appoint me interim advisor for the land use review panel, not as a token gesture, but because they realized my knowledge of land law, property ethics, and livestock rights was more comprehensive than any other member they had in a decade. I accepted, quietly, gratefully. And when I hung up, I knew this wasn't just about a victory. It was about Brutus's legacy. His death had exposed a system of arrogance, unchecked power, and lies. And now, that system was being torn down, piece by piece. And as I stood in the pasture that evening, the winds quiet and the sun setting low over the hills, I thought about what Brutus had represented. He wasn't just a bull. He was more than that. And now, I was carrying that legacy forward. The fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had an HOA or someone in power overstep their bounds? How did you handle it? Was there ever a point where you had to fight for what was right?